Detective Harris lounged in the courtroom like he owned it, the faint creak of his leather chair echoing against the polished wood floors. He had rehearsed this day countless times, the script ingrained in his mind like second nature. Every witness had been prepped, every photo printed and catalogued, every detail sharpened to a fine edge. In his eyes, there was no room for doubt. Tasha Williams would crumble under the weight of the fabricated case stacked against her. He could almost hear the applause in his head, the nods of approval from his colleagues as she faltered, unable to maintain her composure in front of the judge, the jury, the world. Harris adjusted his tie, leaning forward to catch the faint rustle of papers from the prosecution table. He glanced at the jury, a mix of curiosity and boredom etched across their faces, and smirked. This was going to be easy. Tasha Williams had been framed, or so they all thought, and he, Detective Harris, would make sure she paid for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He could feel the satisfaction in the anticipation, that sweet, intoxicating rush of power when truth bends under pressure, or, in this case, under carefully manufactured lies. The courtroom door opened quietly, and all at once, the room seemed to shift. Tasha stepped in, her presence slicing through the tension like a blade. Harris caught his first glimpse of her, and for a brief moment, he hesitated. That hesitation lasted barely a heartbeat before his mind forced itself back into control, dismissing it as a trick of nerves. She was just another defendant, another person who could be broken with the right combination of witnesses and falsified evidence. But even as he dismissed it, there was something in the way she moved that suggested control rather than fear, calm rather than panic. Her posture was impeccable, shoulders back, head held high, and her eyes scanned the room with a quiet precision that unnerved even him. Tasha's clothing was deliberate, too. A tailored suit that spoke of authority without arrogance, muted colors that demanded attention without screaming for it, and shoes that clicked confidently on the marble floor with each step. Harris felt a flicker of unease, irrational and unwelcome, as he realized that she didn't look like a person ready to be crushed by lies. She looked like someone who had stepped into this room knowing exactly how to handle what came next. The judge's gavel tapped sharply, demanding silence, and Harris straightened, though his pulse was a little faster than he liked to admit. Tasha acknowledged the judge with a brief nod, her expression unreadable, yet the tiniest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. It wasn't fear, it wasn't arrogance, it was calm certainty. Harris tried to label it, to pin it down to something he could counter, but it slipped through his fingers like smoke. He watched as Tasha walked past the prosecution table, her movements smooth and unhurried, almost languid, like she had all the time in the world. Each step seemed to announce her presence more than words ever could. The jurors' heads subtly turned, eyes drawn to her in a way Harris hadn't anticipated. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, hushed but perceptible, the tension in the room stretching taut. Harris felt a prickle of irritation. How dare she draw attention like that? She took her seat, placing a folder neatly on the table in front of her, fingers brushing over the edges with meticulous care. Harris leaned forward, studying her, trying to read some hint of weakness, some crack in the armor she clearly wore. But there was nothing, not a twitch, not a tremor, not a falter in her voice when she greeted the court with a simple, "Good morning." That voice, calm and steady, carried a subtle authority that filled the room without demanding it. Even the judge seemed to notice, giving her a faint, measured nod, as if acknowledging a presence that couldn't be ignored. Harris's confidence, carefully cultivated and rehearsed, began to fray at the edges. He reminded himself to breathe, to stay in control. This was the plan. Present the witnesses, lay out the evidence, watch her falter, and close the case. That was all. Yet, despite the rehearsed narrative looping in his mind, a stubborn unease refused to dissipate. Tasha Williams wasn't behaving like a typical defendant. She wasn't even behaving like someone afraid. She was calculating, observing, and utterly composed, and the more Harris tried to impose his expectations on her, the more they slipped away. He cleared his throat, signaling the start of his carefully choreographed performance, but inside, he felt the first real tremor of doubt. Tasha Williams had entered the room like a storm wrapped in calm, and Harris realized, with a sinking certainty he tried to suppress, that this courtroom battle was going to be far more complicated than he had imagined. She was no ordinary defendant, and whatever plans he had carefully plotted might not survive the storm she carried quietly, effortlessly, inside her. The courtroom hummed with a low, expectant energy as the officer took the stand. Harris watched with a smug satisfaction, certain that the narrative they had so meticulously crafted would now unfold perfectly. The man adjusted his uniform, squared his shoulders, and cleared his throat, his eyes sweeping over the jury with the practiced ease of someone used to commanding attention. Every movement, every inflection, had been rehearsed, drilled into him as if he were performing in a theater where the stakes were life and death. "State your name and position for the record," the prosecutor prompted. "Officer Daniel Reed, Metro Police Department, Homicide Division," he replied, his voice steady, measured, authoritative. It carried the weight of experience, the kind of voice people tended to believe without question. Harris' lips curved into a satisfied smirk. This was going to be seamless. The questioning began. Reed painted a picture with deliberate strokes, describing an encounter, a sequence of events, and subtle nuances that made Tasha appear evasive, suspicious, guilty even. Every word was a calculated lie, every pause a signal to the jury that doubt should settle in their minds like a creeping fog. Harris' confidence swelled. Tasha Williams was about to buckle, and he would be the one to watch it happen. But Tasha did not flinch. She remained seated, her hands folded neatly on the table, her posture impeccable, her gaze unbroken. There was no tremor in her voice, no hesitation in her demeanor, no trace of fear. She listened, letting each fabricated claim hang in the air for just long enough to make them think it was working. But there was a subtle shift in the room, almost imperceptible, as if a quiet storm was gathering behind her composed exterior. Harris noticed it first, a twitch of unease in the prosecutor, a slight narrowing of the judge's eyes. The jurors shifted in their seats, curiosity mingling with skepticism. Tasha's calm was unnerving, her stillness commanding attention in a way that the rehearsed performance of Officer Reed could not compete with. The officer continued, describing a moment he insisted was incriminating, embellishing details with the kind of overconfidence only practiced deception could afford. "I saw her at the scene," he said, voice firm, eyes darting toward her briefly. She was evasive, incooperative, and clearly hiding something. A murmur passed through the courtroom gallery. Harris leaned forward, anticipating Tasha's faltering expression, expecting her to fumble with words, to react visibly to the accusations. But she did not. She remained utterly still, exuding an almost imperceptible aura of control. It was as if the lies themselves recoiled in her presence. Finally, she spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. "Officer Reed, are you absolutely certain of what you claim?" Her tone was calm, measured, controlled, yet it carried an undercurrent of quiet authority. The court seemed to hold its breath. Reed blinked. He was trained to withstand scrutiny, to deflect, to maintain composure under pressure. But there was something in Tasha's gaze, something unyielding, that unsettled him. Her question wasn't confrontational, it wasn't aggressive. It was simply precise, and it demanded truth. The kind of truth that Officer Reed had conveniently left behind. I'm confident," he stammered, forcing a nod, but the crack in his armor was visible. Harris tensed, realizing that her calmness wasn't fear, it was strategy. She wasn't just enduring. She was analyzing, reading, calculating every nuance, every hesitation, every micro-expression. She was gathering her ammunition, silently, without a word. Tasha leaned slightly forward, her hands unclasping with deliberate slowness. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a sleek, embossed folder. The courtroom murmured again, curiosity rippling like waves across water. The judge raised an eyebrow, signaling silence. Harris' smirk faltered, a flicker of doubt creeping in at the edges of his confidence. With the same measured composure she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal, Tasha opened the folder, revealing a gleaming identification badge and a government ID. "Before we proceed further," she said, her voice unwavering, "perhaps it would be prudent to verify the credentials of those claiming authority here. I am CIA." The room froze. Whispers erupted, gasps punctuated by the shuffle of papers. Officers glanced at each other, uneasy, their rehearsed confidence collapsing under the weight of reality. Reed's face went pale, the carefully constructed narrative unraveling in an instant. Harris' heart thudded uncomfortably in his chest, a cold realization settling in. This was no longer a performance he could control. The judge leaned back, eyes wide, studying Tasha with newfound respect, and a hint of awe. The jurors sat rigid, minds racing to reconcile the sudden, undeniable truth with the web of lies that had been spun before them. Tasha's calm, authoritative presence transformed the entire dynamic of the courtroom, turning the accused into a figure of unshakable power, and the accusers into vulnerable, faltering storytellers. Harris swallowed hard, realizing that the entire game had shifted. Tasha Williams wasn't just surviving the lies, she was dominating the narrative. Every calculated word, every silent assessment, every subtle movement had led to this moment. And in that instant, it was clear, she held all the leverage now. The courtroom had descended into a charged silence, the kind that clung to the air like static before a storm. Tasha's revelation of her CIA credentials had shattered the careful illusion Officer Reed and Detective Harris had constructed. Every confident smirk, every rehearsed pause, every supposed piece of evidence, now hung in the air, suddenly fragile and exposed. Harris' pulse raced, a cold unease creeping up his spine. He had orchestrated this case, believed in its inevitability, and now the entire carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Tasha leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on the table, the badge and ID lying neatly before her like a shield and a sword combined. Her calm authority radiated outward, infecting the room with a quiet tension. The jurors, previously passive spectators, leaned in, their eyes following her every movement. They were no longer watching a defendant, they were witnessing a force of nature, someone who refused to be defined by lies or fear. "Officer Reed," she began, her tone even and deliberate, "you have testified under oath about my actions on the night in question. Do you understand the legal consequences of providing false testimony?" Her words were measured, precise, each syllable weighted with the authority of someone accustomed to accountability at the highest levels. Reed's confident posture faltered, he swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably. The practiced cadence of his lies had no place here. The courtroom's atmosphere was shifting palpably, the balance of power tilting. Every eye turned toward him, and for the first time, the officer seemed acutely aware of how exposed he truly was. I believe my testimony is accurate," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Tasha's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculated assessment, as if weighing the truth against every slight hesitation in his tone. She let a beat pass, long enough for everyone to notice the tension mounting, before continuing. "Belief does not equal truth," she said softly, but it carried a force that resonated through the courtroom. "Especially when your testimony can destroy someone's life." The room seemed to shrink around her words, every listener acutely aware that what had been presented as fact was now unraveling before them. The jurors exchanged glances, whispering among themselves, while the judge's gaze fixed firmly on the officer, expectant and unwavering. Tasha reached into the folder again, pulling out a small, sealed envelope. She placed it on the table and slid it toward the judge. "Inside this envelope," she explained, "are verified communications and surveillance logs confirming my presence elsewhere at the time of the alleged incident. These are corroborated by multiple intelligence sources and timestamped by independent agencies. In short, the narrative presented here is demonstrably false." Harris felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't a simple exposure, this was a complete annihilation of the story he had so meticulously built. He glanced at Reed, whose face had drained of color entirely. Tasha's calm, unyielding precision was overwhelming, and for the first time, Harris realized that she wasn't just defending herself, she was orchestrating a counterstrike that left them no room to recover. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder, swelling into a chorus of disbelief and awe. Jurors leaned forward, scrutinizing every detail, suddenly invested in the unfolding revelation. Witnesses who had testified earlier shifted uneasily in their seats, sensing the collapse of the very foundation of the case. Even the prosecution's team exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to proceed when the defendant had not only disproven the allegations but had done so with an authority they could not contest. Tasha's voice cut through the tension once more. "I suggest the court review these documents carefully. I am prepared to answer any questions truthfully, under oath. And I expect the same level of honesty from everyone here. Misrepresentation has consequences, legal, professional, and personal." The judge leaned forward, breaking the courtroom silence. "Officer Reed," he said sternly, "given this new evidence and the credibility of Ms. Williams, I will be asking you to clarify your statements under oath immediately." The officer's composure, so carefully maintained before, crumbled visibly. Beads of sweat formed at his temple, his throat tightening. Harris could feel the room closing in around them. They were no longer in control. Tasha remained composed, watching Reed struggle, her expression calm, unreadable, yet charged with quiet authority. Every move she made was deliberate, a reminder that power was not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it was quiet, precise, and unassailable. The courtroom had shifted. The lie that had been the backbone of the case had collapsed, replaced by truth, and in that moment, Tasha held complete command of the narrative. By the time the judge called for a short recess to review the evidence, the damage was done. The office's confidence was shattered, their credibility irreparably damaged. Harris slumped slightly in his chair, realizing that this was more than a courtroom victory, it was a lesson in underestimating the wrong person. Tasha's composure had turned deception into exposure, lies into humiliation, and the courtroom into a stage where she, undeniably, was in control. As she gathered her documents, carefully placing her badge back into her briefcase, the courtroom remained silent, almost reverent. Jurors, witnesses, and even opposing counsel were forced to acknowledge the reality they had underestimated. Tasha Williams was not just a defendant. She was an unstoppable presence, a force that commanded respect and, when necessary, exacted justice with precision. Harris realized, with a mix of awe and dread, that he had just witnessed a masterclass in control, strategy, and unwavering authority, and he had no part in it.